alongside our supplementary primary research, putting the voices of over 150 women across Northern Ireland at the core. At this point, I would like to thank the many women who spoke with us and contributed to our research and work over the past year. We would not be able to have this relaunch today without your contributions, and we want to put your voices at the core of our work to ensure that action is taken. The Feminist Recovery Plan has been developed by 32 policy experts across 26 organisations in Northern Ireland, including women's sector, trade unions, LGBTQ+ organisations, migrant organisations, domestic violence support groups, feminist campaigning groups, human rights organisations, NGOs, and more. Now, before we start with our speaker presentations, I wanted to give a bit of background on why we decided to actually relaunch this plan exactly 1 year on today from our initial launch, especially given how comprehensive the initial Feminist Recovery Plan was. Well, we decided to do this for several reasons. When we first launched the plan, we highlighted how vast policy failures at both the Northern Ireland Assembly and Westminster government level had created deep, systemic and pre-existing inequality that led to women bearing the brunt of the crisis, economically, socially, and in terms of health. For instance, we have worked extensively over the past year to highlight how in Northern Ireland, 79% of health and social care workers are women, 69% of carers, both paid and unpaid, are women, 79% of part-time workers are women, 70% of workers ineligible for statutory sick pay are women, and 30% of all women are not in the formal labour market, with the main reason being due to family and home commitments. On top of this, we are the only region in the UK or Ireland without an executive childcare strategy or childcare provision, the only area without a violence against women and girls strategy, and the only area without specialist mother and baby units for perinatal mental health. This is despite the fact that 30% of all women are considered economically inactive, with the main reason being due to childcare, and that women make up the majority of childcare workers, and despite the huge levels of gender-based violence that exist in our society. Sadly, 10 women have been murdered by a male partner or family member since lockdown began, and at one point we had the joint highest femicide rates in Europe, and currently reported domestic abuse cases account for 20% of all crime in Northern Ireland. Our initial Feminist Recovery Plan was across 6 main pillars: economic justice, health, culture, social justice, Brexit and a Bill of Rights, as well as international mechanisms and best practice. We looked at what was happening globally to address the gendered impact of the pandemic. And at this point, it was just one economic quarter into the lockdown. We looked at places such as Hawaii and decided that we needed to apply the thinking that they had in a local context to Northern Ireland and create a feminist recovery plan. At 137 pages long, we developed this comprehensive roadmap to recovery with policy recommendations that would not only mitigate against the impact of the pandemic, but work to eradicate the pre-existing inequalities that caused such an impact in the first place. We then spent the last year lobbying extensively through briefings, articles, many consultation responses, oral and written evidence submissions and presentations to all levels of government and more. We ran a 10-part webinar series exploring each pillar of the plan in more detail with women who had been directly impacted in that area. And that included topics on poverty, austerity, universal credit, domestic violence, additional health impacts on marginalised groups of women, the impact of Brexit on women's rights, climate justice as a feminist issue, and more. We even summarised each of our recommendations as they related to each ministerial department in the Northern Ireland Executive. And still, only one minister has agreed to meet with us in all of this time to discuss our plan. We asked to be a part of the departmental recovery task forces to be able to provide our recommendations on recovery, and we were told no consistently by ministers and that it was not relevant to their work on COVID recovery. Again, when we asked to meet with ministers, we were told no, that due to the pandemic, their diary had too many commitments, despite our work being directly related to the pandemic and the impact it was having on over 50% of the population in Northern Ireland. So despite the vast economic evidence and policy recommendations we made in the initial Feminist Recovery Plan in 2020, the Northern Ireland Executive has failed to even acknowledge the disproportionate impact the pandemic has been having on women here, a fact that is recognised and addressed globally. We decided that if our executive was unwilling to acknowledge the data-driven recommendations that we provided, maybe they would listen if we put the voices of women at the core who are being directly impacted by policy inaction here. So we decided to undertake the task of updating all of the evidence from the original plan with updated data and recommendations. We then decided that we wanted to do our own primary research, asking women across all of Northern Ireland on how they have been directly impacted and why they wanted a feminist recovery. We carried out qualitative and quantitative surveys, interviews, case studies, and gathered testimonies from over 150 women in Northern Ireland. At this point, I would like to also thank Aoife Mallon, our independent feminist recovery plan contractor, for the vast amount of work that she did on this research. So the results of our research are striking, and I would like to share some of these now. I do think that Aoife is going to share some slides on the screen. So based on the quantitative questions in our survey, some of the key findings can be found here. And again, all of these will be available in much more detail in the supplementary report and the full relaunched feminist recovery plan. So shockingly, when we asked all participants about these questions, these were the following results. 82.1% of respondents said their mental health declined during the pandemic. 57.9% of respondents said that their physical health declined during the pandemic. 81% of respondents who identified as carers said that their caring responsibilities increased during the pandemic. 65.4% suffered financially, either through less savings, increased debt, or struggling to pay bills. 65.8% of rural women stated that they have unstable internet connection, with many highlighting how difficult this made working from home and homeschooling. 58.4% of respondents had experienced either one or multiple of the following: domestic abuse, stalking, harassment, hate crime, and assault. Only 4.5% of respondents did not believe that Northern Ireland has a problem with rape culture. 92.3% of respondents who attended school in Northern Ireland said that they do not feel that they have received adequate relationship and sexuality education. 98.5% of respondents said that they might or would support the introduction of a Northern Ireland Bill of Rights, which was promised in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in 1998. And 93.5% of respondents believe that Brexit might or will have a negative impact on women's rights. In addition, 50% of respondents from an ethnic minority community said that they had experienced issues in attempting to access their mental health, or their health services, So the results are really striking, and we also received a lot of qualitative responses from participants. And these are just a few that we wanted to highlight. Again, there are 14 case studies in our supplementary report that go into much more detail. But here are some of the responses we received to our survey. So Northern Ireland has no violence against women and girls strategy, no Bill of Rights, no gender-based strategy relating to domestic or sexual violence and abuse. Our Assembly want to take an all-population approach on strategies which typically impact on women to a much greater extent. Then I have been isolated because of my health and being pregnant at the beginning of the lockdown. I was off work. The lack of exercise, social interaction, all added to my isolation and affected my mental health. I was physically assaulted more than once at home during lockdown. It felt like I had nowhere to go and was making too big of a deal over these incidents. Being isolated has made getting out of a bad situation worse. These are just some of the quotes that we received from our research participants, but again, they are striking, and there are many more examples in both of our supplementary report and our full report, which is being posted into the chat.
Hi, Siobhan.
Oh, sorry, could I just ask that everyone goes on mute as well, please? Or that the co-host can mute everyone as well. So as I stated, our supplementary report goes into much more detail with 14 case studies from women, speaking on their experiences of debt, poverty, struggling with disability and caring responsibilities, accessing reproductive or maternity healthcare, being victims of racist and misogynistic hate crimes, domestic violence, honour-based abuse, and much more. Today, we're calling on our elected representatives to take action and listen to the voices of women in Northern Ireland who deserve so much better than this. We can't continue with harmful gender-neutral policy making and pretending that women aren't being the hardest hit, especially women of colour, migrant women, trans women, rural women, disabled women, asylum seeker women, and more. If action is not taken, we risk the progress that we have made on gender equality being pushed back by decades yet again in Northern Ireland, and we will fall further behind on rights compared to our neighbours, which too often has been the case here. That is why we are relaunching our feminist recovery plan today. We provided all of the evidence and data needed last year, and still the executive ignored this and has not acted. Now we have updated all of this evidence, but also undertaken our own research with over 150 women across Northern Ireland, telling us their experiences and why we need a feminist recovery from COVID-19. So now that I have given a brief summary, which only scratches the surface of the feminist recovery plans, I would now like to give an overview of the speakers that we're going to have today. So in the first half, we are going to have 3 speakers followed by a video of the Women's Policy Group members. First up, we're going to have Cara Jabola Carolus, who is the Executive Director of the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women. Hawaii CSW were the first group in the world to develop a feminist economic recovery plan, and our initial plan was very much inspired by this. Next, we are going to have Madame Nicole Ameline, who is the Vice Chair of the UN CEDAW Committee on the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Then we will have a representative from the all-party group on the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, where the chair, Paula Bradley, will be able to tell us in detail how they have supported the feminist recovery plan and tried to hold the executive to account over the past year. We then will have our pre-recorded video from the Women's Policy Group, talking about why we are motivated based on our own areas of policy expertise. Then we will have some testimonies from women on their lived experience. This will include Anne-Marie Keelty, who will talk about perinatal mental health, Kamula Manju, who will talk about racism and intersectionality in Northern Ireland, Gay Sherry Bingham, who will provide a women's centre perspective, Ellen Fern, who will talk about the student movement and student perspective, Naomi Green, who will discuss hate crimes and Islamophobia for Muslim women in Northern Ireland, followed by Rachel Jeffers, who will discuss the work of the Cliff Edge Coalition on poverty, austerity and mitigations. Kendall Bousquet from the Migrant Centre Northern Ireland will talk about supporting migrant women. Noelle Collins, who is a Women's Aid refuge worker, will talk about the challenges in supporting women to flee abuse at this time, followed by 2 testimonies from registered childminders in Northern Ireland. So I would now like to hand it over to Cara. Let me just double check that she's on the call because it is almost midnight in Hawaii. Yeah. Let's see if we can spotlight Cara, please. Hi, Cara. Welcome.
Hi. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I think it's so special that the very first women to reach out to Hawaii were from Northern Ireland back last April. So it's really, again, so special to be with you today for your relaunch. And I want to just cover a little bit of our origin story, what we've done the last year, and any kind of advice that we could give you from our experience in Hawaii. I come from a nation that was intentionally divided against itself. And for us, one of the most important starting points when we decided to approach this plan was, how do we once and for all re-engineer our society to end those divisions that were created by the United States to benefit the United States and not Hawaii, the indigenous people of Hawaii, or the local people who live here. So centering not just feminism, but Native values was at the core of our approach to this. And I'm just gonna run down some of our motivations when we started last year. So there were probably four main motivations. The first one was that COVID set off an arms race between reactionaries and activists. And when I say reactionaries, I mean the business sector lobby, private consultants, certain bureaucrats who sought to use this crisis to capture resources and put them in the private sphere, and shower money, huge sums of money coming in from our federal government on the very destructive industries that failed us within days of the crisis hitting Hawaii. And at the same time, right, austerity, like you folks face, defunding those non-market, needs-based programs, jobs, and initiatives was something that we wanted to defend. The second one was really reclaiming economics. And when I say economics, I mean, right, just the very basic definition of distributing the wealth of a place. And that used to be the purview of the elder women in our society. And so it was really important to reframe women, especially working class and non-elite women, as authorities on this science, this male science of economics. So making economics accessible. And then I think probably the third motivation was to create a positive vision to replace what we call PMC, or professional managerial class feminism. In the United States, it's also called liberal feminism. And when I say liberal, I don't mean left of center, but feminism that valorizes traditional liberalism, so individual interests, property ownership, minimal government regulation over the collective interest, and socializing our needs. So those were some of the basic motivations that we started off with. And some of the groundwork that had already been done that facilitated, I think, a warmer reception than we would have had was I came into this office as executive director. We're a government agency, we're a feminist government agency. And for the last 2 years, I ran a training program called Unlearning Patriarchy. And we've had anyone from our state prosecutors, entire offices, teams of attorneys take this, our Department of Health, and it's was really foundational, I think, in warming people up to the concepts that we introduced in this plan. So it was already on the map. They already knew we were agitating for feminism from within the government in close partnership with mobilization outside of the government. And so the tone had already been set. So the reception that we got was really interesting. We didn't we kind of just planned for the document to then be translated into policy outcomes and do our own local thing. But we're just really flabbergasted and astounded by the response that we got. Of course, like the closer to power, the colder the reception, because what we were advocating was for something really transformative, and that can be threatening. So I'd say, some of our legislators, our highest level legislators, initially kind of use pejoratives or minimize the report. They intentionally call it the feminine recovery plan and not say the word feminist. But on the positive side, all of our local governments, so here we have county and city councils, every single one of the active county and county councils passed legislation explicitly for our feminist economic recovery to be the guide for their COVID response at the local government level. And that happened without us lobbying. So I think that was just the excitement getting out about the plan in our local communities, and women approaching their local legislators saying, hey, this just came out because we came out so fast when COVID hit. Um, so speed and being the first out of the gate, I think really played to our advantage. And then we've had a number of successes at our legislative level. I don't want to bore you with our process, but we have a state legislature, and some of the things that we were able to pass, we've only had a very short period of time where we've had an active legislature, but we've expanded the right to abortion for the first time in decades. We now allow non-physicians to perform abortions, which is really important for us during COVID because we're an archipelago. So doctors had to desist travel during COVID, and so huge entire counties were totally cut off from abortion access. But now we've resolved that because the nurses there on those islands and in those more rural areas can perform abortions. And that's something that's now institutionalized in a permanent law. We've also placed government restrictions on certain types of exploitation that were normalized in the past, particularly around commercial sexual exploitation. So that's something that became a huge issue during COVID. We saw landlords, property managers, and other different people in power really taking advantage of vulnerability. And that's something that we wanted to center. There have been other victories. We have childcare subsidies for all that are still open. We're one of the only states that has removed income requirements for those things, because we know, I don't know about you folks, but our school system and our daycare system is still in total disarray. So that won't end until December, and hopefully we can extend it, but that will have to do with the federal government. I'm going to pivot just to lessons. I know I don't have all night with you and it's getting late over here. So I think for us, the biggest lesson is it never leaves the page without organizing and mobilizing. If you don't have a grassroots arm to what you're doing outside of the women's advocate world, if you don't have organizations that are willing to engage in an escalation arch of tactics, more high intensity tactics like holding accountability sessions for legislators, showing up 100 women at town halls, forcing legislators and decision makers to pick a side if they're going to stand with your feminist recovery, doing home visits to where they live and waking them up in the morning and demanding that they listen to women, more aggressive tactics that you can escalate if you're hitting walls. I think that's one of the biggest make or breaks of whether this becomes a reality for women, is if you have women out there who are trained in how important that this is, know the language of the report, and are ready to engage politically and have an infrastructure where they can do that. So that's my biggest piece of advice, is to keep the fire raging in the communities and not just rely on relationships and traditional lobbying to do this, because it is so earth-shattering what we're all proposing, and we're just honored to be part of this global movement with you. So mahalo, have a wonderful conference. I'm sorry I can't stay for it, but it's been lovely seeing you all, and please stay in touch, if anything, on social media. So good night.
Thank you so much, Cara. We really appreciate it, especially because it's almost midnight where you are. But really, we were very much inspired by how quick you were able to develop your feminist economic recovery plan, and reclaiming economics was very much something that we wanted to do. Our initial plan, 2/3 of it was about the economy. Yet when we asked to be a part of the Economic Recovery Task Force, we were told it wasn't relevant to the women's sector. So very frustrating, but a lot of similarities here as well. Northern Ireland, again, still doesn't have full abortion access, was the only part of the UK or Ireland without telemedicine during the pandemic. And we have similar issues as well with, being a post-conflict nation, it can be difficult to get gender as a priority for parties that are often very divided. So it is incredibly inspiring to hear what you have been doing, and we will certainly keep looking at Hawaii as an example. And I really hope that the MLAs and ministers on the call today can look at how your feminist recovery plan has been embraced and hopefully we will start seeing some action on our own here. Thank you so much, Cara. So I'm going to go over to our next speaker, Madame Nicole Ameline. Nicole is the Vice Chair of the UN CEDAW Committee. In 2018, CEDAW led an inquiry into the UK over Northern Ireland's continued refusal to commission an abortion service here. And they've also highlighted a whole other range of areas of where Northern Ireland falls further behind, particularly compared to the rest of the UK and Ireland. And some of the key concluding observations from CEDAW highlighted the lack of a violence against women and girls strategy, the lack of a childcare strategy or provision, as well as the lack of standardized relationship and sexuality education and challenging of gender stereotypes. So thank you so much, Madame Ameline, for joining us today, and we very much welcome your comments, given your position as Vice Chair of the CEDAW Committee.
Thank you very much. First of all, I hope that you hear me well, and I thank you for this very nice invitation. As you know, the day is busy for us, but it's very important for me to express first the greetings of the CEDAW Committee, because you are doing a very outstanding job. And I think that in the current context of post-crisis, it's absolutely crucial to support your commitment and your will. It's a very timely momentum to elaborate a new strategy. And I suggest really to keep in mind a comprehensive approach, first on the consolidation of basic rights. And as you said it, our recommendation for Northern Ireland were very clear on basic rights. Of course, full access to sexual and reproductive rights. And it's for us something very important, because it's a way for women to decide for themselves, as they have to decide for their country and for the planet. Access to decision is really a crucial item for us. And I think that in the recovery plans, we need to insist upon the economic empowerment, leadership, political leadership, and access to decision. And I would like to insist upon the fact that crises accelerate change. And we have to take this opportunity to consider that women's rights are not only an international obligation, but a driving force, a leading force for sustainable goals and development. And I think that the CEDAW Committee, by crossing the rational women's rights and SDGs, has paved the way. And we can consider that we need to use the both strategies to rebuild better. First, I repeat it, by considering women's rights not only as a response to discrimination, but as a response to all the challenges that we are facing nowadays: poverty, climate change, extremism, but also migrations. Every challenge needs equality. And secondly, I think that we need to make equality the right, how can I say that? A sort of prerequisite of sustainable change for the new decade. And it is one of the most important challenges of SDGs, to create a new vision for the next year, the coming years. And I think that gender equality is really a sort of guarantee, a condition of sustainable goals and the success of these SDGs. I would like also to insist about the fact that the political discourse has to change. Now, and I think that it is very important to say that, gender equality has not to be only an item of recovery plans, but a sort of mainstreaming challenge founded on quantified objectives, on assessment, impacts, and we have really to push the state parties to a sort of new accountability on gender equality. And I take just an example about digital transition. If we are not aware of the new discrimination that this new organization of the society can lead, the risk is to have a new structural discrimination between girls and boys, women and men for the coming years. And I have supported recently the first charter on inclusive artificial intelligence, because I think that we have really to anticipate, to be innovative on this field. And more and more we see that even in Europe, the representation of women in the governance structures of digital companies is about 23rd or 25%. So I propose also to be very innovative and to push NGOs and as well as national authorities to anticipate this new evolution. Third, I would like to insist also on inclusiveness. More and more, we consider within the CEDAW committee that this obligation is really also an opportunity to create intelligence, to create solidarity, to create a new capacity to work together, and especially to prevent to leave anyone behind. So it's very important to take the opportunity of the new recovery to integrate this vision, anticipation, acceleration and consolidation of legal frameworks, and inclusiveness. I just want to insist on a last point, which is the effectiveness. We have really to fill the gap between law and practice, as you know. And of course, sexual and reproductive rights is probably one of the best examples. We are very, very aware of the situation in Northern Ireland about that. And we think that it is probably a crucial point to check the capacity to create a new culture on gender equality. And we are waiting a lot from you, from the state authorities, to give the best example about that. Today, we cannot wait for decades. We are at the momentum where women's rights have to become a reality. So I just want to say that I'm with you. I made a very good trip a few months ago in your country, and I think that with your commitment, we can hope the best. And I wish you the best for you, for women. As you can imagine, we will stay tuned, and we'll hope to hear you about that during one of the next dialogues before the CEDAW committee. Thank you a lot.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And we're so thankful that you were able to join us today, especially I think you're in France as well. So we have quite an international group of speakers. But we are really thankful to the UN CEDAW committee for the pressure they have been putting on Westminster government to try and make sure that women of Northern Ireland have access to the same rights as women across the rest of the UK. And within Northern Ireland, we now are pushing for CEDAW to be fully included in our domestic legislation through a Bill of Rights. We have a provision for a Bill of Rights in Northern Ireland. It was a commitment of our peace process, and we see it as a perfect way of ensuring that CEDAW is implemented here and for a consolidation of rights, because for too long, the responsibility of implementing human rights in Northern Ireland has been pushed to Westminster and then pushed back to Northern Ireland, and then no accountability. But we are really thankful for you coming along today and for your contribution. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So next up, we are going to have Paula Bradley, MLA. Paula is the chair of the all-party group on UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on Women, Peace and Security in the Northern Ireland Assembly. So this all-party group has been absolutely crucial to the Women's Policy Group over the past 2 years. In particular, over the past year, the all-party group has consistently tried to hold our executive to account and our executive ministers and departments to account on their failure to respond to the recommendations on the Feminist Recovery Plan. This has included obtaining a full Northern Ireland civil service response to each recommendation, as well as over 30 Assembly questions being sent to ministers, alongside oral questions on the floor and much more. Several other all-party group members are here on the call today too, and the Women's Policy Group, first of all, would like to thank the all-party group for the consistent pressure they've placed on the executive on our behalf to try and move away from gender-neutral policy making that prevails in Northern Ireland, and all of the work that you've been doing to try and implement gender mainstreaming in our Assembly. So thank you so much, Paula, for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for inviting us along to this relaunch today. And I'm glad to be here on behalf of the all-party group. Our all-party group is the only all-party group in the Northern Ireland Assembly that specifically looks at issues around women, and it's been an all-party group that has been around for many years. I think I've chaired it for probably most of those years, for about 10 years now. And I want to say a big thank you before I begin to all of the women out there from the women's lobby who have been absolutely essential in that all-party group continuing. So just want to put that word of thanks and say good morning to everybody. I just want to say, you know, we know as an all-party group, and we know as an assembly, that women have been disproportionately affected much harder as a result of the COVID pandemic, whether that's part-time work, low-paid jobs, zero-hour contracts, childcare issues, or other caring responsibilities. And I know that we had the furlough scheme here in Northern Ireland, and although that was welcome, many women and families find themselves going into debt or further into debt because that reduced income was already part of someone who was on a low income. We also know that many of the issues are not new and have been around for many, many years, and have been highlighted much more so because of the pandemic. And for many issues, such as free and affordable childcare, gender pay cap, welfare reform, health inequalities, and gender-based violence have been discussed and debated in our APG, in our committees, in our Assembly chamber, and most definitely the wider women's lobby. We have seen paper after paper on these issues and many others over the years, but very little has actually been done to legislate and bring about any change. The all-party group, which is frequently represented by the 5 main executive parties and the Green Party, has concentrated, as Rachel had said, much of its time over the past year, focusing on gender mainstreaming and the Feminist Recovery Plan. We all recognise how it is essential that any programme for government must have outcomes that meet the needs of everyone it is there to serve. Over the past year, we have had many witness sessions and have asked numerous questions of all of the executive departments on how they intend to use the information they have received in relation to feminist recovery and what steps they intend to take. We've also asked specific questions in relation to childcare, the gender pay cap, welfare reform, and others. And the responses, I have to say, have not been the most encouraging. It's been very disappointing, some of the responses. We've had responses that have cited Section 75, which I have seen as a way of covering up their responsibilities to women, but also in terms of absolving themselves as well from any meaningful action citing that to promote one section over the other would be in breach of Section 75 obligations. It appeared at times that some of the departments and ministers really didn't get it. They just didn't get where we were coming from at all. So we wrote back again to all of the departments and asked if they'd like to attend our APG and brief us on some of the issues that we had highlighted. And we received one briefing session, and that was from the Department for the Economy. And I think that was because they had already had in place their own COVID recovery plan. If I was to say that it was a lively discussion, I think that actually wouldn't even be scratching the surface, because in their COVID recovery plan, of course, there was no mention specifically of women. I think Rachel and others very much put them on the spot during that, and I think they left that meeting with a lot more food for thought. And I know that there was a commitment made at that meeting also that they would link in with Rachel and others just to try and progress this further. So I think that the fact that we were able to get one of those departments into a witness session with lots and lots of women in the room, and if anybody who's part of our APG or knows of our APG, they will know that it is, everybody is included in it. All of the observers have a chance to ask questions, and all of the observers have a chance to put their point of view across. Everything was up for debate at that meeting, and I think it was very worthwhile. I think the Department for the Economy left with information to carry forward. Rachel had said there in her opening there that our APG was to try to hold the executive to account, and I think try is probably the right word. In fact, trying is probably the right word, because it has been an uphill struggle over the past year to get those answers. Now, I know, as I said, the 5 executive parties are represented on the APG, which is great. And we all then went off and spoke to our own ministers and said, look, really, did you actually see the responses the department sent back to us? Because really they weren't even scratching the surface on the issues that we were asking. So then we put in further questions, and just to say, all of our questions are available on the Assembly's portal, so you'll be able to look at them. And on the second round of questions, we got a little bit more in depth and a little bit, not a massive amount, but a little bit more positive. I know certainly that for some of them, I know the Department of Communities very much were talking about the gender equality strategy, which is due to go to come to the Committee for Communities, which I actually chair as well, which is also a good thing. So we look forward to that, because I think the gender equality strategy will go some way to holding the entire executive to account, because that overarching strategy will have to be borne out across all of executive departments. So I think that is a great chance for us as an APG and for the women's lobby in response to that consultation and in response to the committee. Whenever the committee can get around, or will not be until the end of the year, to looking at that strategy and see how we can make change that will be effective. But of course, we all know that strategies here in Northern Ireland, we have hundreds, thousands of them sit and gather dust in our library in the Assembly. And we know that strategies are only as good as the people within those departments that are put in to oversee those strategies. So that is something as an APG going forward that we will certainly be working on and be part of. I know again, Rachel had mentioned there about the gender-based violence and the increase in that over COVID. And I know that Minister Long is on the meeting here today as well from the Department of Justice. And I know at a point whenever we first started discussing this, that that was very much, they didn't want to see a gender bias put on that it was to be an overarching strategy for all. And through a lot of work and a lot of conversations, that has now resulted in it being a gender-based strategy of violence against women and girls. And for all of us, we know that if there's any strategies or any legislation put in place that is there, that is gender-based, that is there to for women and for families, we know that the direct impact that has across all of society and across, everyone benefits from anything that is gender-based towards women when it comes to legislation and comes to strategies. We so very much are looking forward to that progressing as well. I have to say it has been an uphill struggle this past year to get our Assembly to take on board some of the issues. We will continue to do that. We have many more witness sessions planned. We have many more questions that we're going to put forward. I just want to mention a couple of other things to you, just by the by, just to let you know, as I said to you earlier, I chair the Committee for Communities, and back at the end of June, I signed a letter as part of all of the devolved legislatures. We signed a letter to Westminster to in support of the £20 uplift for the universal credit. So that is something that the committee, which was backed by all of us in committee, by all parties. And I have to say, as part of the all-party group, this is not just one party or another, that this all-party group is pretty much non-partisan when it comes to the issues surrounding women and the issues that women face in Northern Ireland. And we very much work together. And it's very refreshing, and anybody that's attended it will see that. I know there are issues there that there will be party politics around, and they're difficult to overcome. But at the end of the day, we want to progress equality of opportunity for all women in Northern Ireland. I know also and Louise, I see Louise Coyle there on the call. The issue around rural women has also been a major issue, and I'd hope that she'll forgive me as a Belfastie, that quite often as a townie and an urban representative that that slips under the radar with some of us. But as I say, the women from the lobby, or the women's lobby, continue to remind us just what our responsibilities are as elected representatives when it comes to women across all of Northern Ireland. So that's pretty much me. I will continue, and we will continue. I speak on behalf of all of us as an all-party group. We will continue to fight and to challenge our executive and our Assembly in any way we can going forward, because, as I said, we know that we help women, we help families, we help all of Northern Ireland for a better Northern Ireland for all. So thank you very much for having me here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula. And I think that was such a good overview of just the huge amount of support that we've received from the all-party group in the last year. I honestly don't think it would have been possible for us to get even any responses from some of the ministers and the civil service without the help of yourself and the other members. And really, to me, I sit on 5 different all-party groups, and the one thing about the all-party group on 1325 is that all parties are very committed to everything that we're working on. And I know sometimes there is background politics, but for us coming to the all-party group, it doesn't get in the way of the asks that we place on yourselves. So thank you so much. And for 1325 more generally, and the 4 pillars of 1325, this is something that the women's sector very much tries to embody in our work. And it's always about connecting these pillars on protection and participation and how they interact. And I do think that the work is crucial. And for us, we want our feminist recovery plan to be seen as almost like a national action plan for Northern Ireland. The UK government's national action plan doesn't include Northern Ireland. The Irish government's does. But we want it to be a grassroots-led national action plan, and really appreciate all your support on it. And just, I wanted to reiterate what you said about, gender-based legislation benefits everyone. And that is something that's true. If you're trying to solve an issue, you need to look at who's the worst impacted. And if you target them, everyone benefits. And it's something we see time and time again. And one stat just I wanted to raise is around the investment in childcare. Over 90% of childcare workers in Northern Ireland are women. But if we had just a 2% GDP investment into childcare, it would create twice as many jobs for women and almost as many jobs for men compared to the same investment in construction. We are not calling for policies that will only benefit women. They will benefit everyone. And we hope through the work of the all-party group and the women's policy group, we can get there and finally move away from gender neutral policy making in Northern Ireland. So thank you so much, Paula, today to you and the whole all-party group for your continued support and for speaking with us today at our relaunch. So next up, we have a pre-recorded video that we would like to share. And this video is from our women's policy group members themselves, who are all in the background of this call, but really it puts a face to the names of the plan and the women who've spent the last 16 months working on this. Within this video, we talk about every single pillar and subsection of the Feminist Recovery Plan and why we are motivated to do this relaunch. So I would like to hand it over to Danielle, who is going to play the video for you all now. And we will post a link to it in the chat so you can watch it again afterwards. The Women's Policy Group Northern Ireland decided to relaunch the COVID-19 Feminist Recovery Plan 1 year on because
women have suffered more from poverty as a result of a decade of austerity and welfare reform policies. The pandemic has worsened this dramatically, and action must be taken now by our executive.
Because women's employment rights are at risk, women still earn less than men, are overrepresented in low-paid, part-time and precarious work, and because Northern Ireland still doesn't have mandatory gender pay gap reporting.
Because we need a women's employment strategy to address barriers women face in the workplace and changes needed in family leave frameworks to support all workers.
Because women are overrepresented in sectors hardest hit by the pandemic, and we need to address gender-segregated labour markets and harmful gender-neutral policymaking, budgeting, and skills strategies.
Because we know we would not have survived this pandemic without our carers. And women cannot continue to carry the unequal distribution of the care and responsibilities and unpaid domestic labour.
Because we need an executive childcare strategy now to recognise childcare as an essential part of our economic infrastructure and to protect all childcare workers and women struggling to access or afford childcare.
Because rural women account for 40% of all women in Northern Ireland, and we need to properly address unique issues facing rural women and access poverty.
Because paramilitary control and gatekeeping of funding is still prevalent and negatively impacting the lives of many women.
Because the climate crisis hasn't gone away, and we need to take action to address this while ensuring that we are advancing gender equality.
Because we need a mental health strategy that addresses the unique challenges to women's mental health and how poverty and austerity drastically impacts on their health outcomes.
Because women and pregnant people deserve free, safe, legal and local access to abortion care without delay and without harassment.
Because women have been impacted by maternity restrictions, increased isolation and difficulty accessing support. We need long-term funding for community maternal mental health peer support models and a mother and baby unit in Northern Ireland.
Because the hostile environment means migrant women face vast health inequalities and no recourse to public funds is a barrier to accessing support.
Because trans issues are feminist issues and trans healthcare in Northern Ireland is wholly inadequate. Trans people and trans women are dying as a result.
Because disabled people account for 70% of all COVID-19 deaths, and disabled people in Northern Ireland deserve adequate support without having to go through harmful tribunals and appeals.
Because racial justice is a feminist issue. We need to make our recovery an intersectional one that addresses structural racism, sexism, and sectarianism.
Because women already faced huge barriers to politics and public life before the pandemic, and we need to address this underrepresentation of women.
Because we need better victim-led models of restorative justice and a greater understanding of the intersectional impacts of crimes on victims.
Because in our increasingly digital world, we need to tackle digital divides and address the health, social, economic and human rights implications of access poverty.
Because too many women are being sent to prison in the absence of support for domestic abuse, mental health, addiction and poverty.
Because rape culture and the toxic portrayal of women in the media is prevalent in Northern Ireland, and we need to change the culture around this.
Because women and girls in Northern Ireland deserve the same protections from domestic abuse and gender-based violence as our sisters across the UK and Ireland.
Because we need a violence against women and girls strategy that is inclusive of the needs of all women, including LGBTQ+ women, migrant women, disabled women and more.
Because we need to address intersectional hate crime against Muslim women in Northern Ireland and work to eradicate honour-based abuse in all communities.
We need proper, inclusive, mandatory and standardised relationships and sexuality education in our schools. We need equality and diversity education. And we need adult training and education programmes for women delivered locally.
Because women's voices must be at the table to address the impact of Brexit on women, particularly those in rural and border communities.
Because we need greater human rights protections for women, and we deserve a Northern Ireland Bill of Rights, as promised in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement 23 years ago.
Because we need to learn from what is being done elsewhere, look at good practice in other countries and make sure that our COVID-19 recovery is in line with recommendations of UN mechanisms, including CEDAW, UN Security Council Resolution 1325 principles, ILO conventions and others.
Because women's voices and their lived experiences are valid and our politicians need to act now.
Because the women of Northern Ireland have waited long enough for action to be taken to address gender inequality. We deserve a feminist recovery now. Now, I hope that was useful for you and you got to see the faces behind the names of the Women's Policy Group and the wide range of experts that we have in our policy group who work from their own lived experience, but also policy expertise to lobby on behalf of women. We now would like to welcome some of the women that we have had testimonies from over the past year who are going to talk to us about their lived experience. First up, we have Anne-Marie Keelty. If we could spotlight Anne-Marie. So Anne-Marie is going to discuss perinatal mental health and her experiences of having to go through maternity services in Northern Ireland.
Is that working now? I can't see. Yes, you can see okay. Basically, I was 5 months pregnant with my third child when the pandemic began. At that time, there was so much uncertainty. Sorry, my wee woman is not well today, so she's not. There was so much uncertainty and stress of the situation, especially with isolating. So thankfully, I was able to work from home, but I had then the responsibility of looking after my 2-year-old and 4-year-old while trying to homeschool. So for me, attending antenatal appointments on my own was very daunting, as was going into labour in the hospital with no one with you. Thankfully, my husband did make it to the hospital in time. But he was only able to stay for no, this wee woman's just not doing too good. He's only able to stay for a short time afterwards, before I was taken to the ward. So not having anyone for support on the ward, while being in a side room on my own was particularly difficult, especially with a wee baby who wasn't settling and didn't sleep at all that night. On a number of occasions during appointments and when talking with friends, when I was pregnant, it was commented that I was lucky that I wasn't having my first child. But for me, no woman who was giving birth during the pandemic was lucky whether it was their first or not. When I got home from hospital, I had no family support, and contact from professionals was very limited. Despite voicing that I was struggling with breastfeeding, it was perceived that I would have no issues at all as I had done it before, and no help was provided. Thankfully, I was able to get support from online forums. As we went into our second lockdown, I was again isolating, now with a newborn and my 2 other young children. I found homeschooling particularly difficult, and trying to balance being able to spend time with all children even harder. There was no one there to help, and I really missed the small things, like somebody coming in to hold your baby so that you could maybe go get a shower or have a cup of tea. As the months went on, I could feel that the situation was having an impact on my mental health. And thankfully for me, I was able to become involved with the MAS project at the Falls Women's Centre. And this provided me with an invaluable opportunity to meet other mummies who had similar experiences, and also provided that connection within the local community. My little girl's now just turning 1, so I'm at the end of my maternity leave, and I'll be due to return to work. However, I feel that I've been robbed of 8 months of my maternity leave. For that first period, I couldn't take my baby anywhere, couldn't be involved in any groups, couldn't see any family and friends. Thankfully, I was able to avail of the 3 months unpaid maternity leave, and with places open, it's enabled me to be able to get out and about a wee bit. But because that's unpaid, it's actually had a real negative impact on my family financially. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Emery. And I know that that will have meant a lot to many people on this call. So many women have told us how much they really struggled with either having to go through maternity appointments by themselves or the lack of support afterwards. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us today.
Yes. And apologies, Rachel, for my wee Anna. She hasn't been well. She was just out of hospital, so she's not been 100%. So apologies.
Oh, please don't apologize at all. We're at this point now where we're going into people's homes. We're not at an event venue, so thank you so much for coming along today and telling us your story.
No problem.
Thank you. And I did post a wee link in the chat there for the Maternal Advocacy and Support Project, where you can find out a bit more. And within our Feminist Recovery Plan, we've been making several recommendations, including greater shared parental leave and greater entitlement to maternity leave, as well as greater support for maternal advocacy and perinatal mental health. So thank you. I'm going to go to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Gay Sherry Bingham from Atlas Women's Centre. And Gay is going to tell us a bit about a women's centre perspective and how they coped throughout the pandemic. Many of the women's centres in Northern Ireland have struggled significantly for funding, but still were absolutely essential to the women in their communities and stayed open throughout. So over to you, Gay.
Thanks, Rachel. Can you hear me okay? Okay, since the start of the pandemic, Atlas Women's Centre has supported 874 women in total. And this report actually was probably done 2 weeks ago, so it has actually increased from that. This support included friendship and support calls, messages and texts, home deliveries of care packs for mental and emotional well-being, prescriptions, food, top-ups for gas, electric and for phone. We've also completed our end of year report, and I'll very quickly sort of go through the figures just to give you a perspective of how ourselves and probably the other women's centres still provided support throughout COVID. So there was over 25,000 support and friendship calls, over 16,000 support through social media, 15,000 plus supports through texts and emails, 14,000 plus training and support attendees. That was in-house mostly though, via Zoom. We delivered 1,365 art and care packs within the community. Because it was over Christmas, 64 Santa sacks were delivered throughout the community, 611 food boxes delivered, 242 prescriptions, fuel, food store vouchers delivered, and 21 ICT equipment on loan, and some broadband supply delivered as well. Overall, there was 679 children supported we had 480 new families supported. Our women within the community who were trained over the last many years and attended art and crafts courses, they made over 3,000 PPE for NHS and for local care homes. We had over 50 volunteers helped us throughout COVID, and actually on that we were nominated and won the Queen's Awards for Voluntary Services this year. So we're delighted and that the good work that was recognised within the community. So we'll go back now to some of the feedback that we got. So throughout of all of this, we listened to and collated all the concerns, the needs, the worries and stories for most of these women. And through these then that we realised the pandemic really did have a deep distress and impact on many of them. The generic responses told us that many were feeling extremely isolated and lonely, deeply anxious and stressed due to the mixed media, and then many just stopped watching the news and looking at Facebook because they were extremely nervous. And many were really totally stressed out with homeschooling. Again, I think somebody had mentioned earlier, really very difficult getting medical appointments for children and even getting through to the doctors. I think one of the women told me that she was on the phone for 7 hours and still didn't get through to the GP. One of the comments from one of the women I'll read out here says, "I live on my own with 2 daughters. If I leave my house, I might get really ill. Who will look after them if I die?" Now, we still support this woman and we still provide online support and Zoom classes and home deliveries. And this woman is extremely nervous. Now, we are opened at the minute. So at the minute we would have, so we would a lot of parent support. So the parent support, the MASS project, Mindful Parent and Family Mindfulness. So each week, in a current week now, there would be 32 women in a morning session. Now, pre-pandemic, there would have been 120 places. So it's actually there is a real fear. A lot of women are not going to get the support that's needed. So we have to put plans into place, and hopefully we're actually renovating a derelict building next door to us. So the older, more retired women that would use the centre weren't as worried and stressed out about finances. However, they did feel very isolated. But regarding finances, they weren't as stressed as working parents and parents who were in receipt of benefit. They were extremely concerned and extremely anxious. And I actually just got a text there this morning from one of the women who we had delivered the food boxes to and the care packs. And she had said, "Look, I am extremely embarrassed," asking, "But is there any way you could help out with food again? The children need uniforms. One of the children was bullied at school. She now has to change school. She's on her own. She has asked her partner for help. He now has lost his job, so she feels that he can't support her. So again, it falls on mum to try and fix all of these problems." Children needed fed. Without children needed fed, they weren't at school. The house, the heating needed to be on all day. TV was on, more electric was being used, and fuel was totally vanishing. We got a phone call, got a text one Saturday morning, and it was one of the mornings where it was really cold, snowing. One of the parents rang and said, "Look, I don't expect you to help me here, but is there any way at all somebody can top up my electric that you know of?" Now, we had funding and a lot of donations from people in the community that we could use. We never give out cash, but what we do then is we would go and get their card or get their number and then top up for fuel. So we were able to, she lived on her own, a young child under 1, and we were able to top up her fuel, which meant she could heat the house and she could cook because she had no gas either. So the benefits, because we stayed open, it was crucial that we had to stay open over COVID. And in 1 week, we delivered 21 food boxes to help with the food poverty. But that continued on, especially throughout the first lockdown. As I said, we had 334 new referrals to Atlas. The majority of these referrals are support for mental health. Since the start of the pandemic, 133 women have received one-to-one counselling to help with mental and emotional well-being. And we were allowed to, whenever we weren't able to stay open, that was through Zoom and support calls. But then, thankfully, we were allowed to open if it was to provide mental and emotional support. So we would have a lot of counsellors in training, and the counselling's free. So a lot of the women were able to avail of that because, again, we have childcare, and the children were able to use the creche. A lot of the parents couldn't attend any of the support at home because of, I think it was Anne-Marie there, yep, children were in the background, and there's absolutely no way that they could gain the support. So thankfully, the childcare was opened, and mum was able to get support. So 133 women received one-to-one counselling to help mental and emotional wellbeing. This is an increase of 44% in the previous year. Okay, but we're reopened, and since April, we are now currently supporting 240 women. 130 are new, and 69 are referred from health visitors. And again, the MAS project is so important within Atlas. A lot of new referrals, women. My son's partner is one of them, really extremely anxious throughout the pandemic, getting appointments, experiencing it on her own. And actually, on a good note, one of the women that had attended the MAS, she had attended sort of, helping prepare you for birth, and she was having a home birth. She had done a lot of art and craft activities to help prepare. What happened was her and her husband had to deliver the child at home. And she said that she had all the arts and the crafts and the mindfulness around her. And thankfully, she had attended the motivation, the confidence, and the MAS project in Atlas, or she would not know what happened. So it was a positive experience for her, which was great. We have no doubt that these figures will continue to rise, and more women, whenever more women are confident to leave the house, Atlas will be bursting at the seams. Today we have a garden now. Thankfully, over lockdown, we created a community garden, and there's a kindergarten cook activity, bug hunting and bug cakes today. And I think there was 23 mums and children attended yesterday. So hopefully that's happening in the garden today. But I want to finish off then on a couple of positive notes and quotes from the women themselves. So one of them is, I was so grateful when the girls got their goodie bag, but when I realised that there was one for me, I just couldn't believe it. That goodie bag changed me. I was in a rut, not getting showered or doing my hair, actually not caring about my appearance or making time for me. Well, when I saw the shower gel, shampoo, and the new jammies in the bag, I just cried. I won't forget that shower. Or my hairdo that day. It often makes me smile. And the last one that I'll read out is, this was a card that was left at the centre door one morning. To all staff and volunteers at Atlas, thank you for all your love, support, and new skills training during lockdown. My mental health slipped throughout COVID. However, when I felt it going, I signed up for one of your inspirational courses. This got me back on track and has even helped me see new potential in my life. Thank you for being the bringer of hope during these hard and life-changing times. I wish I had more to give you to show thanks, but for now, it's just my words. And she's now going to be a counsellor. So thank you very much. That's me now.
Oh, that is absolutely amazing, Gay. I can't get over the amount of women that you've been supporting throughout all of this. And thank you so much for coming along today and giving an overview of just how broad the work is of a women's centre, and how important it is that our women's centres are properly funded and supported, because you really are the pillars of our community. And we know a lot of the women's centres that we work with, right up in the last week of March, didn't know if they were getting funding to keep their staff the next week. So we really need long-term sustainable funding, because without it, God knows what would happen to the women in these communities, and the impact you're having is absolutely phenomenal. So thank you so much, Gay. So I'm going to go to our next speaker. We have a few more, and we're going to go about 2 minutes each maximum for each speaker. But next up, we have Camilla Manju. And Camilla is from the Belfast Multicultural Association, and she also contributed to the Feminist Recovery Plan by sharing her expertise on honour-based abuse and how to recognise it and address it in Northern Ireland compared to other areas of the UK. So Camilla is going to talk more about racism and intersectionality and her experiences since she came to Northern Ireland. So over to you, Camilla.
Thank you very much for having me.
Coming from Mauritius, I never considered myself to be a minority or felt that there is anything I could not do or achieve. Being in Northern Ireland, I have gone from exotic to exhausted very quickly. Facing racism, harassment, discrimination, and honor-based abuse has caused chaos in my life, to the point that many times I thought dying was the only way out. I have faced discrimination due to my female identity also. I noticed how these forms of oppression come together in many instances. Despite being beaten on numerous occasions, to this day, I have been let down by the criminal justice system and many other statutory organizations. I have always had big aspiration and been very ambitious. I will always remember when I was younger, I used to question everything, and my dad would always say there's nothing I could not do. Over the years, a lot of people, the system, has knocked this out of me. People undermined what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. I am here today because I'm fighting the good fight for me, for my children, for others. I need my daughter, and I need Black and ethnic minority women and girls to understand it is possible for them to have high aspirations and achieve their ambitions, no matter how much their voices falter. I need them and you to know the importance of raising issues within communities and putting themselves and yourselves in places of representation. I want to encourage women to be courageous and be present in all spaces, civic and public, where there is a lack of representation. Otherwise, nothing will change. We need to be in every aspect of the community. We need to be seen. We need to be really asking those questions and put ourselves forward in the political arena. That's the only way we can make a change. I mean, when you think about women of color in history, what did they fight? We're fighting the same fight, except this time it's slightly different. I don't need anyone to tell me that I'm strong or resilient. This is not what I'm here for. I should not need superhero powers to just exist. Here's some advice for use from Mina Abdi. Whenever you're implementing the feminist recovery plan, own your privilege. Talk about the uncomfortable. Be strategic in your activism. Figure out how and where you can do most good. Start where you are. Ask yourself, what do I want the future to look like? Do your research. Resist the white savior complex. Start with your own circle. And finally, you need to be brave. These things are not always comfortable, but commit to pushing past the point of comfort to take effective and impactful action to change this. Even if that action is messy or risk the loss of your own privilege or powerful status, stand with me and many others in solidarity. I need you to remember you are not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different to your own. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Camilla. And I think it's advice that we all certainly can learn from. And I want to thank you for sharing your experiences today, but also for the ongoing work you've done with me over the last few months, because you truly have made the Feminist Recovery Plan stronger, more representative. And I really hope that we can continue working together to ensure that all women in Northern Ireland from every background are benefiting when we're doing this lobbying work. It is crucial that we have all women's voices heard. So thank you so much for today. So next up, I am going to go to Ellen Fern. Ellen is the president of the National Union of Students, Union of Students Ireland, also known as NUS-USI. They represent over 200,000 students in Northern Ireland, and this is their second term as the president. Coming from the student movement myself before being a lobbyist, this is something that is incredibly important to me, and we do know that a lot of students have been totally left behind throughout this. And one of the most common responses we got from the women we surveyed was from women students who've been paying for accommodation that they couldn't live in or couldn't access, and paying full tuition fees when they weren't able to go to campus or have any form of the university experience. So the marketisation of education is harming all women. It is also harming working class communities in particular. And I want to hand it over to Ellen, who's going to give an overview about what students have faced over the past year. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And yeah, I just wanted to say as well, this relaunch this morning has been so fantastic, and it's genuinely been such a privilege to hear about all of your experiences so far. So thank you so much for that. So yeah, I suppose I always say that students are such an incredibly unique section of our population. Students are not just learners, students are learners, but students are also renters, students are workers, students are key workers, students are carers, students are parents, and so much more. We're so unique because every single aspect of this pandemic has impacted us in some way or another. Whether that's been students losing employment, students paying thousands and thousands of pounds in rent for accommodation that they're not living in because they're not at uni, students paying thousands of pounds in tuition fees for an online experience, students who are juggling childcare with online learning and working and living through a pandemic. And as usual, as we all know, all of these issues are heightened for women in education who are carrying mountain loads of untold labour on top of everything else. In the north, we have over 200,000 students across higher and further education. That includes roughly 1 in every 9th person in Northern Ireland. The support we've received from government to date has in no way reflected how widespread the student population is, how widespread our needs is, and the financial and mental health crises that our students are currently experiencing. Last year, as I'm sure you remember, there was no plan put in place to support students returning to campuses in September in the midst of a pandemic, which resulted in absolute chaos of students being locked in accommodation and genuinely very scared for their mental health and their own safety. And there was nothing in place to support students on issues which were absolutely inevitable given the pandemic. Now, we're 16 months into this crisis and we still have no plan for how to help students recover from COVID-19. We're now at the end of July. There's still so many unanswered questions about a national plan for returning to campuses next month to financially support students who haven't been able to find work for 14 months or who are now about to graduate into an economy with nowhere for them to go. Or again, if students will, for the 3rd academic year in a row, be pushed into rental contracts paying thousands of pounds for accommodation that they won't need because they might not be on campuses. So at this stage, we need the executive to take responsibility to ensure that what we've just been through doesn't continue to happen every single year. We need long-term strategic action for our students, and we need to see students included in the government's recovery plan. And more than anything, we need that plan to have a gendered lens to reflect the reality of what women in education go through, which is so much more heightened, and they have so much more issues on top of everything that I've just mentioned. There will always be unity between our two movements, and I think we can all agree that this is a shared fight for the feminist future that we all deserve against the marginalisation of education and against the patriarchy that's currently holding us down. So yeah, Gur my agad.
Sorry, I was having issues unmuting myself there. You'd think 16 months in I'd be used to it. But thank you so much, Ellen. And I do think it's really important that we do recognise that students aren't just students. They are members of our society and have very real lived experience that is being forgotten. And in particular, I think about students who are parents or carers or who have been made redundant but do not qualify for universal credit because they are students. It's an incredibly challenging time, and we need to very much oppose the marketisation of higher education. It should be something that is a public good that everyone can access and that recognises the gendered impact it has. So thank you so much, Ellen. Next, we are going to go to Naomi Green. Naomi is from the Belfast Islamic Centre, and she is going to speak about hate crimes and Islamophobia that Muslim women in Northern Ireland face. So over to you, Naomi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel, for having me. First of all, the Muslim community in Northern Ireland is very diverse. We come from at least 43 different ethnic backgrounds, and we don't know how big the population is, but it's estimated to be anything from 6,000 to 10,000 people. The majority of Muslims in Northern Ireland belong to ethnic minority communities. Many are immigrants, and a smaller proportion are refugees and asylum seekers. Since 2016, nearly 2,000 Syrian refugees have been settled in Northern Ireland. The majority of them are Muslim, and around half of them are women. But it's important to note that not everyone from a Muslim background will identify with a wider Muslim community or even with Islam itself. Anti-Muslim sentiment often intersects with other forms of discrimination. This means that hate crimes and incidents directed at members of the Muslim community are often complex and intersectional. For example, regardless of someone's immigration status, they may be targeted with anti-refugee slurs because of the association between refugees and Muslims. Occasionally, individuals from ethnic minority backgrounds who aren't Muslim may be assumed to be Muslim and targeted as such. Someone's religious or traditional dress may be misinterpreted as support for extremism. And research has shown that veiled Muslim women are often seen as emblematic of Islam and are likely to experience gendered Islamophobia both online and in real life due to the intersection between their visible Muslim identity and their gender. Those from asylum and refugee backgrounds are also tend to be more targeted as they're more often placed in more vulnerable situations, and they often have less access to support networks. In 2019, Belfast Islamic Centre ran a hate crime survey, and 77% of respondents had an anti-Muslim incident in the past 5 years. Of those, only 23% reported it to the police. This is for a number of reasons, including fear of reprisals, a belief that nothing would be done about it, or that it was part and parcel of being a minority in Northern Ireland. The majority of them were women. Examples of anti-Muslim prejudice included physical assaults and aggression in the street, families and individuals intimidated out of their homes, arson and petrol bomb attacks and vandalism on Muslim homes, businesses and places of worship, as we've seen with the BMCA fire in January, and even shots fired in a car. And it was an empty car, to clarify. In recent years, leaflets opposing Muslim immigration in Northern Ireland have been handed out in the street, posted on windscreens or through doors of homes across Northern Ireland on at least 20 separate occasions. Photographs and videos of Muslims, primarily of Muslim women and their families, have been posted online. And as far as I'm aware, none of these have resulted in a prosecution. My own experience in Northern Ireland are that even though the vast majority of people are open and welcoming, it's not that unusual to face hostility. As a white Muslim born in Northern Ireland, on a number of occasions I've faced racial slurs and been told to go home or speak English. I've even been followed around a supermarket and prevented from leaving because I'm a visible Muslim woman. The slurs have been racial, but I was singled out because of my faith. Most of these I never reported. In fact, when I did report a crime unrelated to my faith, the perpetrator was able to publicly single me out, and I faced abuse based on my faith from his supporters. Prejudice against Muslim women has a wider impact. Islamophobia and prejudice can in fact impact women seeking help on other issues such as mental health, maternity care, rape, FGM, honour-based violence or domestic abuse. They may fear that speaking out against individuals in their family or community will contribute to wider stereotypes that affect their lives as well. They may be concerned about accessing services outside of their community. They may face hostility, judgment, or lack of understanding from wider society, or even those they have turned to for help. A lack of recognition that their spirituality and faith has been an important tool of resilience and healing, or fear they will be unable to observe religious dietary practices or other practices if they were to go to a shelter, for example. The dominant conversation around Muslim women seems to be primarily about our bodies, how we present and how we dress them. Muslim women's bodies are subjected to regulation and political actions within societies across the world, either in the name of religion and culture or in the name of national security, preserving national identities or assumptions around gender equality. It's frustrating and repetitive. We are more than our choice of clothing, and it contributes to the 2D picture of Muslim woman that overlooks the issues that affect us on a day-to-day basis. We have agency. There is no lack of strong, intelligent and articulate Muslim women, but more space needs to be created in order for women to access support and for our voices to be heard in wider society and among feminist spaces. Don't speak about us or for us, speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for your contribution today, and as well for taking the time with me over the last few months to really make sure that our feminist recovery plan was stronger, that it fully represented Muslim women and highlighted the real complexities that we face in relation to hate crime and honour-based abuse, and how understanding intersectionality is at the core and that it needs to be in our legislation. The Women's Policy Group has been lobbying for misogyny to be recognised as a form of a hate crime, and also for intersectionality to be at the core of this, because of the vast levels of misogynistic and Islamophobic hate crimes that Muslim women in Northern Ireland face. So we're really thankful to you for coming along today and really looking forward to continuing our work together after today on the implementation of the Feminist Recovery Plan. Thank you. So we're going to go to our next speaker. So next we have Rachel Jeffers. Rachel is from the Law Centre Northern Ireland and the Cliff Edge Coalition, and they are campaigning on a whole range of issues in relation to welfare reform mitigations, particularly on how women are impacted by poverty and austerity and the need for absolute urgent action. This includes the £20 uplift, removing the 2-child limit on tax credits, and a whole other range of issues. So over to you, please, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for the invitation to come back along and to the relaunch of this plan. And just a huge thank you to everybody for sharing their contributions today. It's been really inspiring. And really, I'm a much better person all around for having worked with you all and for listening to your stories. So thank you very much for that. As Rachel said, I'm here with a couple of different hats on. I'm here in my capacity as a welfare reform advisor at the Law Centre, and the Law Centre's co-convener of the Cliff Edge. But Rachel has also only given me 2 minutes to summarise everything that's happened, and I can only talk about a few discrete things. So what I'm going to be talking about firstly is the 2-child policy. And I could see some people talking about that in the chat earlier on as well. And there has been a recent judgment handed down by the Supreme Court, which has been really, really upsetting for the advice sector and for the women's sector. So some of you who may not be familiar with the 2-child policy and benefits, it's essentially a rule which restricts support for children on benefit claims. So you would only get financial support for your first 2 children or children born before the 3rd of April 2017. Now, there are some important exceptions to that rule. However, when this was challenged in the courts, really, really disappointingly, the courts have decided that yes, that rule is discriminatory. Yes, it does have a significant impact on women. However, that's just an inevitable consequence of the rule as it stands. So it was really, really surprising that that was so overtly stated in a judgment where basically they said, yes, this is discrimination. It can be considered to be discrimination, but because there are more women that are providing childcare and raising children, that's the reason why it's discrimination, but it's also inevitable. And then they went on to justify that the inevitable impact is outweighed by the importance of the objectives of the 2-child policy, and namely the objectives of the 2-child policy are protecting the economic well-being of the country and the fair and reasonable benefit system. So I do find it very difficult to sort of reconcile those 2 points of having a fair and reasonable benefit system that is so easily discriminatory against women. The other court decision that I want to really quickly mention also came out really recently. It only came out on the 15th of July of this month, so we are still digesting the implications. And this one was a challenge on the pre-settled status. So for some of you who may not be familiar with that, you try to make a claim for means-tested benefits and you only have pre-settled status as your right to reside, then that is not going to allow you to successfully claim the benefit. You're going to need an additional right to reside as well. So this was challenged. It's been challenged by colleagues in England, challenged in Northern Ireland, most recently at the Court of Justice of the European Union. And surprisingly and shockingly, the court came back to say that that's fine. You can refuse benefits if you've only got a pre-settled status, and that it is compatible with European Union equal treatment regulations. However, you just need to make sure that if you're going to refuse a benefit, that they can get help from somewhere else, which may just be social services. So this is going to be particularly problematic as we figure out the legal implications of this and how this is going to be rolled out. But the decision really highlights by the court how social security laws are very much biased in favour of men, and doesn't take into any account at all the value of periods of childcare. If you're caring for a disabled relative, if you're caring for an elderly relative, or any periods of instability that are arising from domestic violence, you will be, unless you have worked, unless you're able to work, you're not going to be able to qualify for those benefits. And that is, again, going to have a disproportionate impact on women. Now, I could continue to talk about this forever and a day, but I do just want to quickly highlight from the Cliff Edge coalition side that we are still working hard and pushing hard to get the legislation brought through. We need the legislation to extend the mitigations, to close the loopholes, to give us that valuable additional protection that we need now more than ever, as it appears that our court system is going to allow for this inequality within the social security system to continue. So we really need our executive to push through that legislation. I know they've been trying, been very active on it, and there is a block somewhere that we just need to try and get round and to get that in, because people of Northern Ireland really, really do need that support in place to help them. And I know that obviously the women's sector, the Cliff Edge Coalition and the Law Centre through its great work will try to make that happen in whatever way that we can. So thank you very much, and thank you for the invite to come along and speak today.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And it's truly shocking to see these public decisions that disproportionately impact women and actively discriminate against women being upheld in the courts. You just have to look at welfare reform and the fact that 86% of tax revenue savings have come from women. This is the harm of gender neutral policy making. It is not gender neutral, it targets women. So thank you. And you can see all of these recommendations in more detail in the Feminist Recovery Plan as well. So we're going to go to our next speaker. I'm sorry that I'm flying through them, but we have a few more contributions and then we'll get some quick questions in at the end. But our next speaker is Kendall Bousquet. Kendall works at the Migrant Centre Northern Ireland, and she is going to give us a bit of an overview about supporting migrant women throughout the pandemic and some of their work. Over to you, Kendall. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's so inspiring to hear from this group of women today, and a real honor to be in all of your company. I am the Migration Justice Advocacy Officer at Migrant Centre Northern Ireland, which provides specialist advice and support services to migrant and ethnic minority communities across Northern Ireland, including immigration advice and support for applicants to the EU settlement scheme, victim support and advocacy for victims of race hate crime, and benefits advice services. Rachel's talk there was a really great segue into what I'm going to talk about a little bit today, which is how the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on migrant women has been so compounded in terms of harm because of the effects of the hostile environment and no recourse to public funds. No recourse to public funds has caused severe limits on the amount of services that we are able to provide to an entirely new class of people in the wake of Brexit, as it would now extend to EU nationals as well without settled status, as she mentioned. Ever since the introduction of the Immigration Acts of 2014 and 2016, we are essentially in a wraparound immigration surveillance and enforcement state where people are being facing immigration controls at everyday interactions with doctors, landlords, universities, banks, and this is a real barrier to people being kind of included within the system, and particularly within the context of the pandemic, the healthcare system. In addition to barriers to accessing healthcare, obviously related to COVID-19, the British Medical Association has stated that immigration control as practiced, immigration reporting as practiced within the NHS has precluded migrant patients, including migrant women, from accessing healthcare for things like women's health, cancer screenings, and even prenatal and maternity services, which are chargeable at up to 150% of the cost to the NHS to those who have no recourse to public funds. In the wake of Brexit, as I said, this is just extended to an entirely new class of people, EU nationals without settled status. No recourse to public funds is already a policy rife with human rights issues, which have been challenged in European courts, as Rachel mentioned. No recourse to public funds denies people the right to accessing public housing, benefits, other forms of social support, and it puts those who are already vulnerable or financially precarious at severe risk of destitution. There are severe well-being risks associated with destitution that are amplified for the most vulnerable, including women with children and victims of domestic or sexual violence. The really tragic irony is that we now have women who fled or even claimed asylum based on gender-based violence who are coming to Northern Ireland and are even more vulnerable because of the position of destitution that no recourse to public funds puts them in. I know that our time is very limited, so I'm just going to wrap it up there, and thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Kendall, and again for all of the work that you've been doing in the Women's Policy Group on advocating for migrant women. It is absolutely essential that we have this at the core of our research and our recommendations, and thank you for raising some of the issues. Everything that Kendall has mentioned you can find in the Women's Policy Group Feminist Recovery Plan in much more detail, and this includes recommendations in relation to no recourse to public funds, hostile health environments, as well as closing down Larne Detention Centre. So thank you so much, Kendall. Next, I'm going to go to Noelle Collins. Noelle is a Women's Aid refuge worker, and she's going to talk to us about some of the challenges that they've faced in supporting women who need to seek refuge while fleeing domestic abuse throughout the pandemic. Over to you, Noelle. Thank you so much.
Thank you. First of all, can I say hello to so many familiar faces? It's lovely to see you all, and congratulations to all the work that's happening through this pandemic to support women and children, because by supporting mothers, you're also supporting their children. Unfortunately, as was said earlier, 10 women have been murdered because of domestic violence through this pandemic. And they're the women that you've heard about, unfortunately, the women who have suffered extreme near-death injuries never reaches the media. And those women are living with that, maybe disabilities for the rest of their lives. So I just want you to keep that in mind, because I believe we're living with another pandemic, and that's one of domestic violence in our society, and something has to be done about it. I think the COVID pandemic has certainly highlighted domestic violence and the issues around that. I'm certainly not here to talk about all of the work in Women's Aid. I was asked to talk about the experience of a refuge, and I'm talking to you now from a refuge in South Belfast, where we have 20 bedrooms. All of them have been full throughout this pandemic. We didn't close. We kept it open, but it was a very different service that we offered. Women who usually plan their leave didn't come in. They couldn't come in. It was those women who were in crisis situations that we housed throughout this time. Women who were brought to us by police or in emergency situations, usually in the middle of the night, to be honest with you. And it was a very different way of working, because we had to isolate the women when they came in rooms for 48 hours before they could go into the communal areas. So very, very different. So we put microwaves in the rooms, everything women would need. And I have to say, staff were absolutely fabulous here. They really were, all dressed in aprons and PPE, but women came and women stayed. Now, if you can imagine leaving your home with your children, coming to stay in one room, and being isolated. I mean, home must be very bad to do that, but they stayed, and they stayed throughout. And after they did the isolation for the couple of days, then they could join the other women in the communal areas. So, I mean, I have to say, it wasn't as normal. Our playroom was not as normal as it was, but we managed. And today, this house is full, and we have 20 women, and I think between 15 and 22 children in the house at the minute. So domestic violence hasn't stopped throughout this. I know all our sister organisations across Northern Ireland have been the same. We have 3 refuges in Belfast and Lisburn, and we have 106 bed spaces, and they're full every night. Every day we are refusing someone because we just don't have the spaces anymore. But we've had to be careful again through pandemic. And at Christmas, it was a nightmare because 7 of the staff got the virus and had to go off. But none of the women did, which was great. Through the pandemic, 4 babies have been born, which has been wonderful, and they came back. Women have moved on and have been rehoused. We work really closely with the housing executive to do that. So all of that has been really, really good. I would like to mention that we also support the adult victims of female trafficking in Northern Ireland. And we had a surge in that throughout the pandemic. Whereas 2 years ago, we were supporting 12 women. In the height of the pandemic, we were supporting 60. So that hasn't stopped, and I've just realised that trafficking wasn't mentioned this morning, but it is a real problem here in Northern Ireland, not just for women coming into this country, but also for local women. Our society has changed so much, and there are now local women who are being exploited, not only by their partners, but by organised crime gangs. And thank you for allowing me to be here. I do not think that refuges are sad places, because they're not. Women here have now came out of the situation and are looking forward to their lives free from domestic violence. So it's a lovely place to work. It really is. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Noelle, for giving us an insight into the absolutely crucial work that you've been doing with Women's Aid in the refuge. A lot of the stuff that you mentioned as well, we have tried to include as many recommendations as possible, including the fact that we need much more refuge spaces in Northern Ireland to be compliant with the Istanbul Convention, and also need for secure housing, and to make sure that any reform to housing fully supports victims of domestic abuse. But lovely to hear about the babies being born in refuge and the incredible work that you're doing. So thank you so much. We have just 2 final contributions now. One is going to be a bit about the experience of a registered childminder in a group called We Ducks, and this will be read by Alexandra Chapman, who is from Employers for Childcare. They are also the co-conveners of the Childcare for All campaign along with WRDA. And then we will end the lived experiences testimonies with a video from another registered childminder. Childcare workers have been the absolute core of our society as well throughout this pandemic, and too often we're left behind. In many recovery plans coming from the executive, there was a failure to even mention childcare, and in particular for registered childminders, the majority of whom are women, the support was wholly inadequate. While others were getting proper financial support, a lot of childminders were only given £200. So we want to just give a platform to registered childminders right now, and I'm going to hand it over to Alexandra, who's going to read a statement from We Ducks.
Morning everyone. It's been so inspiring to hear everyone's experiences. So as Rachel said, Claire, who's the owner of We Ducks, has asked me to read this out because she's working this morning. So I'm just going to go and read out her experience over the past year. So when I was asked about my experience as a childminder through the pandemic, I first thought of sunshine and peace. That quickly changed when I started thinking about what actually happened and how quickly my life was turned upside down. I experienced an array of so many different emotions. At the beginning of March 2020, I had a thriving business. By the 23rd of March, my business had essentially shut down. I found life after the 23rd of March strange. I was so used to being very busy every day, going from looking after 7 children to caring for 1-2 days a week. I missed all the children so much.
The word challenging springs to mind. That could well be an understatement. When I think of all the new rules and regulations I had to adhere and adjust to, which were changing on almost a daily basis. There were financial worries in the early stages of the pandemic due to reduced income as a result of the restrictions imposed. I was entitled to self-employed financial support, although it wasn't a great deal, but at least this was something. The worrying didn't stop there. I went through a rigorous cleaning regime every evening when my wee ducks went home to ensure extremely high standards of hygiene were maintained. I knew that when I welcomed the children I cared to into my home in the mornings, that I would also invite germs in too. Well, in November 2020, I got a text message to say that a child I cared for had tested positive for COVID-19. I had to close my business, self-isolate and inform PHA and all of the parents and identify who was a close contact. All of the families were very supportive, bar one mum. This one mum made me question if I'd done enough, if it was my fault, what have I done? It was at this point I felt like closing wee ducks for good. I couldn't physically do any more than what I was doing. Thankfully, childminders are a great support for each other and other parents were all fantastic, and no other child in my setting tested positive for COVID. Homeschooling was tough. I pulled on experience I gained more than 20 years ago. Every day was a balancing act, trying to ensure every child's needs were met and schoolwork was completed to the best we could manage. I still worry about our letter formations. From the start of the pandemic, my eldest daughter at that point was 18 months into her nursing degree at Stirling University. She worked tirelessly within a busy hospital, taking all precautions necessary, missing out and celebrating her own 21st, my 40th, and student life in general. My daughter wanted to come home for a while. This involved a risk assessment carried out long before she came home. She had to stay with her grandparents for 10 days to ensure she didn't carry any germs to my wee ducks. Wee Ducks is thankfully now back to a thriving business. Hopefully we're all on the other side now, and I can once again lock away the early memories of childminding through the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for reading that experience out about wee ducks. I think it's really important to highlight how challenging it has been for the women who are working in the childcare sector to keep up with changing regulations without any support or financial support to do so, because the work that you do in supporting the children across Northern Ireland is crucial, and there would be no reopening of any form of the economy without our childcare sector. So next, we're going to go to our final testimony of the relaunch, and this will be a video from another registered childminder. This is from Deborah, who is going to tell us a bit about her experiences and how she managed throughout the pandemic. We will then close the testimony session and stay for another few minutes for any questions and answers that you might have. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Deborah Harvey and I'm a registered childminder here in Lurgan in County Armagh. Working through the pandemic as a registered childminder has had numerous challenges, and on a personal perspective, the one for me, which was the biggest, has been cleaning. You're constantly cleaning your equipment, your house, your toys, your inside area, your outside area throughout the day, but you're also spending an hour and a half at the end of your working day, which is already long, just making sure that everything is clean to the highest of standards in preparation for the next day. So I personally have struggled with that, and also with the costs that have been incurred with that. Bucket loads of hand sanitizer, it costs money. One other thing that I have found very worrying the whole time has been just making sure that the children are safe. The children are my priority, but also my own family are so important, and I just don't want anyone to get sick. So you're constantly being vigilant and watching out for any symptom, a cough, a cold, any symptom whatsoever related to COVID. You don't want to go then to communal areas, maybe where the areas aren't that clean. Just ensuring that the children are kept safe at all times. From a support perspective, I feel it's really important to recognise the Facebook group that I'm part of, for registered childminders. It has been invaluable. The knowledge, skills, expertise, guidance, support from that group is amazing, and the people in the group, male and female, are fantastic people. They're always there to help, support, guide, and it's very much like a family network. It's amazing, and childminders don't really get enough recognition. We rock, we really do. Something also I wanted to say is that the sustainability grants from the early years team has been fantastic. I personally have availed of that, and it has been a lifeline. really throughout this whole pandemic, and I'm very grateful to that. One thing I need to mention, I think it's very, very important, is the formal inspection process. My inspection done via Zoom was horrific, and by the end of that hour and 20 minutes on a Zoom call, and then over an hour actually home visit after that, I could barely have said my name. The social worker could not have been nicer. She was an absolute lady, but the process was inappropriate and not effective at what it was trying to do at all, and it really needs to be addressed with the early years team. I think it was inappropriate and wholly unacceptable that your mind was meant to be in two places, caring for young children and also trying to keep your mind on what you're meant to be saying, and questions that needed answered and information that needs shown to the social worker. So moving forward, that really does need to be addressed. Hope that's okay. Thank you. Hi, my name is Deborah Harvey.
No, so that was the last testimony that we were sharing today, and I think it just gives an insight into how logistically difficult it was for childminders and all childcare workers to manage throughout this pandemic, but also the huge amount of stress that they faced in trying to do so. And there's been a few comments in the chat as well about how essential childcare is, and this has been a core argument of the Feminist Recovery Plan. We need to totally reassess our economy and put care at the core. So thank you so much to all of our speakers today. Thank you to our two sign language interpreters, Linda and Tessa. I know Tessa has to leave soon as well, but we are just going to stay for a few more minutes to those who might want to ask a question. I know there's been a few coming through in the chat, so if you could either raise your hand in the chat, and thank you, Tessa. Thank you so much.
And bye-bye. Thank you.
And yeah, so if there are any questions that people want to ask.
Deborah Yapachev wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Deborah. Oh, you're on mute.
That's got to be the most used phrase, hasn't it, of this pandemic? You're on mute. No, I just wanted to kind of just add a wee bit, actually, because I'm a branch secretary in Unison, and most of my members work within, the NHS and the independent care sector, with the majority of them being women. And many of our members are low-paid female workers. And, the calls that we've received throughout the pandemic have illustrated how when it comes down to it, it is women who have been at the front of this pandemic. Their calls have been about things like juggling work, childcare commitments, and other care commitments in terms of like maybe older members of their families where they've had to provide care for them. And it's kind of brought everything, I suppose, into sharper sort of focus. And for me, the solutions are a decent wage for those working in the NHS and the care sector, something that would potentially raise many of our low-paid female workers into the living wage bracket for the first time. Stronger employment rights in the independent care sector, greater flexibility in terms of, work-life balance, flexible working from home as well as in the office. And above all, which has come through from a lot of the speakers, a childcare system that, is fit for purpose and that would, help people to get a better balance in life, whatever the circumstances. I just wanted to congratulate you actually on the event and on the relaunch of the recovery plan. I'm really looking forward to having a good look at it. And I just thought the balance of speakers was fabulous. And the issues that they brought up were important issues for all of us. So it was really relatable. So basically, I just want to say good luck with the relaunch the plan. And I do hope that, trade unions, will continue to be involved in helping to process that as well. So congratulations.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I really appreciate it. And, we've been so delighted to have trade union members as a part of the Women's Policy Group. And, we've been calling for a long time. We need a women's employment strategy. We need to deal with this actively now. So thank you so much for your contribution. I think we have a few others coming in. So I can see Laura is pinned now. We also, I think, have the Infrastructure Minister here. The Justice Minister had to head on, and we might have some comments from Mike Nesbitt, the Vice Chair of the WPG. So Laura?
Hiya, I was just wanting to ask if there was anything being done to help women stuck in unstable housing, both from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive and private landlords. As a single mother myself stuck in unstable housing, I can directly say the pandemic has really impacted all of us stuck in this situation. And it's made everything a whole lot harder when it comes to our family commitments, homeschooling, being a full-time carer for people.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. And definitely it is something that we have raised in the plan. So we have a section on, we're calling for the decommodification of housing. We really think that there needs to be much more social housing and a fair allocation of housing as well. There's so many women that told us issues with landlords exploiting them, with issues with arrears, with housing benefit, and the real drastic impact poverty is having on those in the private rented sector and in social housing. So we do have a whole range of recommendations on it, and I definitely think it's something that needs to be one of the key priorities. In the plan as well, we've called for a review to the intimidation points that are given to people who are in insecure housing. So for those who are facing issues with their family life, there needs to be reform. We can't keep having women being put to the bottom of this list, especially single mothers and especially disabled women. We need to have adequate social support for the housing. So I'll send you on a copy of what the recommendations we have been making on it and the contact details for the expert who wrote that section, if possible.
That's brilliant, thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Minister Nicola Mallon, for joining us as well.
No, thank you, Rachel, and apologies that I couldn't be with you for the duration of the event. The personal testimonies that I did get to hear were very powerful, and I suppose the question, that you're posing in terms of the plan going forward is, how are we going to correct the wrongs and the structural discrimination that there is right throughout our public services and right across housing that we've touched upon there. So what I'm going to do is go through the plan. Obviously, there are issues around public transport, for example, street lighting, connectivity that fall within my portfolio. And so the challenge is, what more can I do as a Minister for Infrastructure? But the big question is, what are we going to do as an executive? We're currently discussing and working on a COVID recovery strategy. I think it's very important that women are front and centre of that, given that they have been so disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, but that it has just deepened the inequalities that women were facing before this. So I think that we've been through a horrific time, but we have an opportunity now to try to do things better. And so we need to see a gender-based approach to our policy, and we need to be very mindful of the role that women play and how we're going to support them and empower them.
Thank you so much, Minister, and we really welcome your commitment as well to trying to fully implement gender mainstreaming in our policy. And quite often we find that different departments maybe think that gender just sits with the Department for Communities, and that is not true. It is absolutely integral to every department in our executive. In infrastructure, for example, the issues that you raised as well, women rely on public services much more than men. And some of the groups that have been lobbying at the minute, for example, is our Women's Centre. I know they've been working with yourself to try and ensure there's access to breastfeeding on public transport, and that this isn't something where women face discrimination. But other areas as well, anything we do to deal with the climate emergency and how we look at our investment into green jobs, that should be done through gender budgeting and to ensure that women have equal access. We should have our whole care sector seen as a part of our essential infrastructure. It holds our society together and needs adequate investment. So we very much welcome your comments today and would love to have a meeting with you at some point after today's event where we could go through some of these recommendations in more detail. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'm just conscious of time. We've gone a wee bit over, but I wanted to check if anyone else has any comments or questions at all that they'd like to bring in. Hi, Claire.
Hi, hello. Listen, just again, like everybody else, I want to say thanks very much for hosting this. It was absolutely great. Not just great to hear from the speakers, but great to see the numbers turning out as well. And I think that shows you the support for the work that you're doing, Rachel, and everybody at WRDA and within the policy group. I think you're an absolute force and only growing. So thank you. I'm going to be maybe a wee bit, but I hope encouraging you to keep going, because if you're looking, and you know, despite good people, and this is personal to nobody who has elected office, you know, politics does not lead change. Okay, what brings change is when people come together and put their agenda to the fore, and that's exactly what you're doing. And without you doing that, we will continue to be ignored. This plan was first put out last year, and it was comprehensive and it was detailed. And I want to pay tribute actually to Mike Nesbitt, because I know that he has mentioned it and raised it on the floor and during debates in particular as well. But here we are a year later, not talking about gains and not talking about progress, talking about the dire state and the deeper impacts and the harder hitting impact on women in Northern Ireland. So I just want to say that the job's not done, but I am so encouraged to see the sector, to see women, and to see the services and organisations coming together and standing together, because without you doing that, we're not getting the change. And let's not forget that there's elections next year. Okay, so it's not words that we want, it's manifestos, it's pledges, and it's delivery, and that's the most important. And you're absolutely right. I think when Paula said earlier about, you know, the gender strategy coming out, you want to be gender neutral, absolutely bizarre, but that's the level of thinking that we still have with the majority of decision makers in Northern Ireland, and I'm absolutely delighted that we got that turned over. But that's only the start, and I stand with you and always will. But I want to say fantastic and well done.
Thank you so much, Claire, for your support as always. I don't know what we do in the women's sector without you, but it means so much, especially in your role as the chair of the Women's Caucus and the other work you're doing right now on buffer zones and the Climate Change Act. We really appreciate it. And we totally agree. A number of us were involved in the expert panel for the gender equality strategy, and a huge number of us are involved in the co-design group. Our gender equality strategy needs to have gender specific language. It cannot be gender neutral. And same with all strategies: anti-poverty, disability, LGBT, anti-racism. We need to recognise women throughout all. So we really appreciate it. And our first speaker today, Cara, just shows the difference when your elected officials actually take account of what the work you have been doing. So thank you to you, and also thank you to Mike Nesbitt, probably one of our biggest supporters in the Assembly and constantly asking questions. Have you responded to the Feminist Recovery Plan? We're 1 year on now. Every department knows about it. We feel that our elected officials should be held to account at this point and tell us why they're actively choosing to ignore this evidence. So thank you so much. So any other final speakers or comments at all?
Rachel, can I just come in quickly? Sorry.
Yeah, I can't see who that is actually.
Paula Bradshaw, sorry.
Oh yes, Paula.
Hi, Rachel. I just wanted to confirm we have a planning day coming up soon. People know I represent the Alliance Party on the Bill of Rights Committee, and just to say thank you to the women's sector who put in such a powerful submission to that and provided oral evidence. So just to say we're going to be taking that forward, hopefully in the next 4 weeks, the planning day, and then the contributions you make will hopefully be very visible in the final output from that ad hoc committee. But just to say thank you, like everybody else, I thought it was a great event and really appreciated the invite.
Thank you so much, Paula, and for your support as well in the Assembly. And our new research shows that 98.5% of women support a Bill of Rights for Northern Ireland, so it's time to make it happen. And just to note as well, you know, we're happy to work with every political party if they want aspects of the Feminist Recovery Plan to be included in their party manifestos. We are willing to work with you on doing that. It's time that we are paid more than a lip service. It is time that our elected representatives were actually looking at the issues facing over half the population here. So thank you, Paula, and thank you to all the other MLAs and ministers and MPs who attended today. We really appreciate it. So I'm just wondering, any final comments at all before I close the session for today? Yeah, Alexa.
Sorry, just quickly, but I feel like you, Rachel, for all of the work that you have done, deserve a massive round of applause or Zoom claps or however we want to do it, because I have never met someone who works as hard as you do. And obviously, you know, the rest of the Women's Policy Group have done so much work on this, and they've all been fabulous. But Rachel, you're a powerhouse. So thank you so much for what it's worth, for, you know, in part leading the women's movement and kind of bringing us to where we are today, and getting such a powerful document out there. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexa, but honestly, I can't take the credit for this. You know, over 30 women involved in writing this, and I think the true strength of the Women's Policy Group is our collaboration, and the fact that we all work together, whatever the issue is or whatever the topic is, we get ourselves behind it. So thank you so much, Alexa. I really appreciate it. It's so nice. It's going to get emotional there. So I'm not sure if there's anyone else that wants to make any comments just before we close the event.
Rachel, can I share here? Sorry, my Wi-Fi, I can't turn my screen on, but can I just alert people I've stuck the link? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Emma. So for anyone that didn't hear us, Emma Sharon from Sinn Féin.
I've just stuck the link there in the chat. It's just a 5-minute survey monkey. We've got a gender budget in PMB that I know I'd met some of the sector about prior to launching it. So it's live there for another couple of weeks. It's a 5-minute survey just to ask people if they get on, and I know it's during the summertime, so it's maybe not had the pickup that we wanted to have. So if people could take a wee minute to fill that in, and congrats to you all on the relaunch. It was a brilliant event.
Thank you so much, Emma. Yeah, so we're definitely going to try and get some responses into that. Honestly, a lot of the issues in the Feminist Recovery Plan will be solved if gender budgeting was done at the first stage of policy development. So we really appreciate your work on this, and we'll share that out with everyone as well. So thank you for your support here and through the All-Party Group and the Bill of Rights Ad Hoc Committee. We really appreciate it. So I know there's a few questions have come in on the chat, but I'm really conscious of time at this stage because we've ran 15 minutes over so far. So unless there's any final comments that anyone wants to make now, I am going to finish up and close the event. And I just want to say, you know, a massive thank you to every single woman that spoke to us over the last year, to the 150 plus women that shared their stories and how they've been really directly and harmfully impacted in the last year. Because in telling your story to us, we are able to try and make sure that your voice is heard. And we hope that all of the elected officials here today will take account and take responsibility for the harm of gender neutral policy making and actively try to change this. The Women's Policy Group has extended invitations to work with all of you, and we want to, and we're happy to. I'd also like to thank all the women on the Women's Policy Group. They're absolutely exceptional. We wouldn't have this document without all of you, and in sharing all of your expertise and working so hard together, I really think that we're trying to make a difference here. Thank you to all of our speakers. It has just been incredible to hear from you today. And it just brings to life all the data that we're trying to show, you know, trying to tell people, well, this is how it's impacting us. I think it's so crucial. Thank you to our interpreters who have been fantastic throughout the event. Definitely not an easy event to try and interpret with so much going on. But we actively want to make things more accessible and hope that we can continue to do this moving forward. We will send out the links to the full report, the supplementary report, the YouTube video, and the recording once we have it on our website to everyone that registered. And if anyone wants to work with us further on the Feminist Recovery Plan, my email address is across all of that, so please don't hesitate to get in touch. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been a fantastic event. I've loved it, and I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as we have. So thank you on behalf of the Women's Policy Group. And here's hoping we can finally start working towards a feminist recovery for Northern Ireland, because women deserve better than what they've been given so far. Thank you.